on. A couple of them are fairly large. There's two $50,000 grants, Andrew Lloyd Webber grants that we're still waiting on decisions for, and a couple of grants also through the American Academy of Dermatology for shade structures that are out there. We don't know whether or not those will be successful, but those have been submitted. We also had an update on where things stand with the meal debt. Good news on that front is that it has leveled out. Earlier in the year, the meal debt was increasing at a fairly high pace, $800 to $1,000 a week. Likely that was a result of the recent change from the federal government no longer funding. It was no free meals for everyone as it was through the pandemic, and there's a re-education that just took some time for many parents in the district to understand those changes through the good work of the school level and also Aramark as well. They've been able to sort of correct the ship a little bit and getting the information out. A large driver of the increased debt seemed to be some students that were coming up and requesting a second meal. That number has significantly decreased. So the numbers have plateaued, which is good. The current debt is just over $31,000, not a great number, but it really has plateaued. We are also still continuing to look at information through the townships to whether or not ARPA grants may be available to help to some degree, whether that can offset some of that. We still don't know, and we're waiting for some more information from the township on that. And finally, we got an update on two other large grants that are, one has already been funded for the district. That's the SDA grant in the amount of $258,632. And another one, which is a large pot, it's a $350 million ROD grant. However, that's one that we still have to apply for. That application portal is not even open, so we're not in a position to do that. We're in conversations now with Garrison Architects to take a look at what sorts of projects may be most likely to be successful if we were to apply for any of that grant funding. Target projects are the sorts of things that were taken out. Some of the late projects that were taken out of the original larger bond program or bond proposal, to see whether or not some of those might be good fits. It is anticipated that that portal will open sometime within the next couple of months, and we should be in a position by then to have identified some potential programs that we can apply for. If that is successful, that money, however, wouldn't be available until sometime in the summer, around July. But we're working with Garrison to make sure that we're in a position to take advantage once that's available. If are there anyone else on the committee, other committee members want to add any of that information, any detail, any questions from any committee members or other board members about our meeting? As I said, it was dry and straightforward. Okay, Ms. Gallagher.
I guess I don't know if this is necessarily appropriate, but if it's not, just let me know. I guess regarding Bruno Associates, with us being in like our final year, one thing I think, might be helpful in directing them and us working together is potentially like setting better goals and defining how the type of relationship you're looking for, like specifically saying, like, I think it would be great if the district or we or whomever, however that collaboration works, could identify like for example, like just say, we only want to apply for technology grants, or we only want to apply for playground improvements, or fill in the blank, right? Like a direct focus to really see how they can serve us. I've written grants before. I understand the time it takes to do it. So, you want to make sure that when you're doing it, you're hopefully going to win. So I really think that like grant writing and those funds can be like used for the district in great ways. It's just maybe a matter of setting good goals in collaboration with them to see how they can go in the next year.
And that's a great point. Part of the discussion that we had last week was as part of the communication, what can we do to better communicate to you, grant writer, as a partner? And if that is that an additional level of specificity or otherwise, so that, those are great points that both of you made at the meeting last week and that we've taken to Bruno and Will in the future. All right, I think that's it for BNF.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we move on to Human Resources. Ms. Elmore Stratton, if you could kindly give the committee report.
Sure. Everyone knows we're confidential. So the first thing we did was welcome our new committee member per our board reorg. So Mrs. Fleischer is currently our new committee member on HR with myself. So she and I have, we've talked about how we're going to continue at our meeting. We all talked about how we're going to continue with what we had proposed prior to reorg, with the stress being mostly on us keeping recruitment as a consistent category for us each month, along with any other things that come up in terms of major happenings in HR, like negotiations, contracts, that kind of thing. The other things we discussed at our meeting that I can share is we took a look at some current roles and revised some job description revisions that were proposed by Mrs. Adrian, which we talked very thoroughly about. Sorry, braces in, that's messing me up tonight. And then we also, again, just really stuck to recruiting. We shared with Mrs. Fleischer kind of our updates from the recruitment fair, but then also Ms. Adrian shared with us where we are with our vacancies and our major areas that will be coming up as a result of some retirements and changes in the month of January. She also shared with us that the district has signed up for a few job fairs that are not operated by us, but that are pretty large in our region, such as Rancocas Valley, New Jersey Schools. New Jersey Schools has 3 virtual job fairs. Rancocas Valley has 1 job fair that we'll participate in. And coming up in March, we'll be in the thick of our hiring. So we really want to continue to get good candidates so that our admin teams and building teams can have a nice population of folks to interview in March. Spoke about the one thing we don't want to speak about, sort of like Bruno, never want to talk about it, but we did discuss the fact that we will have 1 major retirement that we'll have to fill pretty soon. So I will share with the board how that process will go confidentially as we move forward. I think that's pretty much all I can share. Did I miss anything, Ms. Adrian? Okay, Ms. Fleischer, you want to add? That is public.
I just wanted to make sure it was public that you are retiring. And I just wanted to thank both of you for having me on the committee. And I'm happy I get to work with you. Being here for 20 years, it's nice to be able to, work with you on this committee while you're still here. So thank you for having me on the committee. Both of you, thank you.
Awesome. Anything else? I think we're good. Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Stern.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Elmore Stratton. And we move on to policy and legislation. Mrs. Fleischer, could you please give the committee report?
Great, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Mrs. Wethington, for giving the presentation earlier. I want to thank everyone who called in, everyone who's in the public here for getting up and giving us your comments and your questions. And we also wanted to let you know that if there's any other slides that we feel need to be put on after our discussion tonight to be posted tomorrow, we'll make sure that we're adding some. So this is an ongoing conversation. I'm going to talk about what we did at the committee and where we are right now, but this is a first reading of this idea of a change of policy, and they're still up for discussion. So we want to continue to bolster up any slides or any information people need. So just going into what we spoke about at our committee meeting. So just to make it clear for all of the board members, there was only 1 action item that was on our committee agenda, and that was the policy 8110 that we spoke about tonight that was in the presentation. And that is, again, the first reading to change Russell Knight School to be sent to Rosa Middle School instead of Carusi. There's also actually updated wording that reiterates that any student that began at Rosa can stay at Rosa instead of transferring to their home districted school, which would begin this fall. That would be just to make it clear that 6th and 7th graders at Rosa could stay at Rosa instead of going back to their districted middle schools, whether it be Carusi or Beck. And so one of the things that we spoke about is, why has this changed? So it was in December that the administration had given the recommendation to change something that we had voted on last February. And the main driving force for the change for ARC to go to Rosa was there was more than a double amount of growth of enrollment than expected on the west side. And similarly, oh my gosh, sorry, it's getting to be late already. To its sending schools. And the realization of this problem occurred when the district started looking at how the implementation of the new middle school structure would work. And that's what Mrs. Wethington had spoken about tonight. They took into account the new numbers of the actual enrolled students, not using any of the extra GRIP numbers or anything. It was the actual enrolled students, and extrapolated it out over the next few years. And the jump in enrollment was very unexpected. So that's how it was brought to our committee, and that's how the change in the policy was enacted. And another thing we want the board members and the community to know is, why is it important to take the action now on this policy? And there's two main reasons. Number one, the bus routes are bidded out for our district for the following school year in February. And to be ready for this process, we need to make sure that any of the changes having to do with sending schools is actually approved in January, so that they're able to make the bids out for buses in February. And so, like I said, this is the first reading of this policy. It goes back and then brought back for a second reading on the 24th. And then it would be approved at that time if that's what would happen. And if it is approved, then in February, we could actually do the bidding out of the buses. The second one is that the 5th grade information nights for Carusi and Rosa need to formally be set, because by approving this policy enables students and families the ability to know which schools are going to next year. So that is also important. So these are two timely things, and that's why we are not speaking, we chose not to redistrict elementary schools. There's no policy that has to be changed about that. This is the only policy as far as changing any school districting that is going to be taking place at all. So that's why we're focusing on the middle schools tonight. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting that Mrs. Wethington pointed out, and is a big strength to this, is the fact that special education classes, if night school does go to Rosa, and enables the enrollment enables there to be a more equitable special ed classes in both of the schools, so therefore across the entire district. And one of the things I thought was interesting that we spoke about is that it would actually enable more classes to be put into either Carusi or Rosa, mostly Carusi, that might be missing some of the special ed classes, so kids can go closer to their home school. That is something that is big. That is what the historical, when you talk about this, the historical precedence was really to create neighborhood middle schools, and neighborhood schools is really the basis of Cherry Hill. We have so many schools, whether it's the elementary or middle school, and that's where we're really getting back to, is neighborhood middle schools. So that was really what we discussed as far as, and what we've learned and what, we worked with was this policy change. And I think that was pretty much what I had to say about that. And let's see, was there anything else? Were there any questions or discussions about that actually policy from any of the committee members or any of the board? Mrs. Stern.
I just want to clarify a couple of things, because, over the past several months, several discussions and items have come up of two things you talked about. One was the enrollment numbers. And if I'm not incorrect, Mrs. Wethington, or Mrs. Fleischer, can you please identify just how many students enrolled both in August and September as per your recollection? Because I just recall that number being pretty high. I actually remember being at back to school night and at one of the high schools and being told, we've had this many students enrolled just this week. So really kind of major shifting numbers. So if you could speak to that.
Mrs. Stern, from August to November 2022, so this current academic year, Carusi enrolled 77 new students during that time period. By comparison, Beck enrolled 42, so Carusi enrolled almost twice as many students as Beck did. Rosa enrolled 4, but Rosa is an outlier because we were in this current academic year, we're still enrolling kids through the enrollment process. I just want to add one other thing. The 5 schools that would be sending to Carusi enrolled 163 students during that time period. In comparison, the school sending to Beck enrolled 42. So it's 4 times the number of kids enrolling on the west side as opposed to the east side. It's just not going to be a sustainable number of students that we can serve at Carusi.
Thanks for just reviewing those numbers and especially how they go through November, it's not just, I think a lot of people would assume that families enroll their children before the start of school, but that's not necessarily the case at all,
No.
especially not this year.
It's not the case,
Okay.
not this year. And no.
Thank you. And the other thing, Mrs. Fleischer, just wanted to ask if you mentioned the kids that are currently at, you said Rosa, but I just want to clarify the language on the policy change. If you would just clarify, is that students in any of our middle schools? If that applies wherever they started, they can finish the current students there?
It is, but Rosa is the only one that actually pulls from both Beck and Carusi areas. Since if you don't go to Rosa, you would go to Beck and Carusi. Beck or Carusi. So specifically, it really talks about the Rosa students because the 6th and 7th graders, say you live in the Beck sending area, they don't necessarily in the fall have to go to Beck. That's the reason why I was specifically speaking about Rosa, because in the normal circumstances, unless a child has special education and they are assigned to a specific school, whether it be Beck or Carusi for a specific reason, it would be Rosa that would have like those 2 other school students but they can finish out their middle school experience, which I think is very important to all of them, especially after COVID. Any further questions? Yes, Dr. Root.
I just want to put in a comment because I wasn't in that committee, so I didn't have a chance to kind of throw in my opinions. One of the things that motivates me the most and when I was looking at the numbers, and this goes all the way back to last year, was kind of equity in like the amount of crowding in the schools, the amount of the overall numbers. And when we saw the most recent numbers with Carusi being so high, I thought about a few things. One of them is some of the data that's come out. And one of the clearest pieces of data that I see is no matter where you are in the district, if you're from an economically disadvantaged home, that is often a risk factor for academic troubles. And so in thinking about that, I was like, well, it's not a judgment. It's a fact that there's a lot more economically disadvantaged students on the west side of town. And so if we put a burden on Carusi with larger numbers, then like resources get spread thinner for that population. I really think by moving night to Rosa, that allows us to kind of have smaller class sizes and more attention per student in an area where there are clear measures that suggest they need a bit more in terms of resources. So that's, just so for the board, that's part of my thinking, but behind, about how this is playing out for what it's worth. So.
Thank you for your input, Dr. Root. Are there any further questions from the board or any of the committee members? The only other things I just wanted to go over, we had two other discussion items on our agenda, and it was policy 5111.2, which is open enrollment. That was a discussion that's going to continue, as well as policy and regulation 2312 of class size. One of the things we are talking about is since we are not going to be redistricting the elementary schools, is if there are any creative ways that we can help out and figure out any of the problems that are coming up with our elementary schools. Actually, we will talk about it at a different date with the numbers that we have for elementary schools, but we'll talk about it probably next month. But it's actually very interesting when you get down into it, because believe it or not, it doesn't look like our schools are overcrowded if you look at the numbers with Mrs. Wethington. She brought to our committee specific numbers for every single school and what openings they have right now. So it was sort of shocking to us, to be honest, because we expected it to be more crowded. And I don't know if you want to talk about that at all. I mean, it was in a discussion and we did discuss it in the committee, but we can bring it to the next meeting if you want to.
Sure. So during our conversation during P&L, part of the conversation was about the concept of our elementary schools being overcrowded. So I asked the registration office to just run us the number of growth spaces. We derived that number by looking at the number of the class size and the sections in any given building. And again, we talked about the number of sections may change in any given year. Room utilization may change in any given year, depending on what kind of classes and programs we have running in a building. But we have 578 growth spaces in elementary school district-wide. Every building has space. Some schools have more space than others. We may not have 10 seats in any given grade, but there's 6 grade levels in the elementary building, and those are dispersed across the different grade levels. You'd be surprised at some schools that have the most room and schools that have the least room, but we have room in every elementary school in the district.
Thank you, Mrs. Wethington. So that's a great jumping off point for our discussion going forward, I thought, especially because we aren't redistricting. There doesn't have to per se be a policy change, but we are looking at lots of different ways to try to relieve any of the issues that are going on at the elementary school. I believe that is all we have. Any other questions from Aiden?
I just had a quick question. I know this is not a major focus by any means of the redistricting policy change, but in 8110, I did notice that there's also a deletion of item 1B about students being able to be bused from one high school to the other for languages. I was just wondering.
Thank you
yeah.
for bringing that up. Actually, that actually is something that is wording that has not been used or action that has not been used since 2011. So it's wording that just needed to be taken out of the policy because it's no longer of use in the district.
That's
But
what I
thank you for
thought.
bringing it up. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so
Aiden.
there are no students that'll be
There are
affected by that.
no students affected. It's something that hasn't been of use since 2011 to 2012, correct?
Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Stern.
I just wanted to, first of all, thank you. It's very helpful the way you clarified all information and presented it to us. I think that, it's obviously a very important topic. It's a very, one that we all need to be very thoughtful of. And I really think that the information you provided and Mrs. Wethington provided and will continue to provide, really gives us a full picture of how do we address the top priorities. How do we make these neighborhood schools, really work for the students who are in those neighborhoods? And I think the idea that we're going to gain for our special ed students, we're going to gain more local programs for them, is certainly an ongoing conversation for students with families of students with special needs. That is not the same conversation oftentimes for kids who have the appropriate classroom in their neighborhood school. So I think that's great. And I appreciate the spoiler alert about the upcoming discussions about elementary, approaching the elementary populations, although we're not redistricting, that's the consensus, that's the right move. I think whatever the numbers are, it's important to understand them. It's also important to understand the fact that children are experiencing more crowded schools, even if they're not technically overcrowded. And I think, I know that, in our individual conversations that we sometimes have, I've heard some really exciting, creative approaches to how do we address that? Because we want to make sure that we have enough of an approach, but also are not locked into approach, because we do see so many population shifts over years, and there are patterns. So, we want to be able to be thoughtful and planful with that. So I'm excited. I'm not on the committees. I don't get to be part of those discussions, but I do appreciate the updates about them. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stern. If there's no more questions, then I'm done with my report. Thank you. Did you have a question?
Are we still?
Mrs.
we
Elmore
allowed-
Stratton.
Sorry about that, Ms. Fudge. Are we allowed to still, we can send questions for the committee still on this topic even after this evening?
Yes, because it's the first reading. So if you have any other questions or discussion, we can still have that at the second reading.
Great. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to Dr. Rude, who takes the lead with strategic planning. If you could please give the report from the committee.
Sure. So so strategic planning is kind of a newish committee, not really a new committee, but most of last year we spent strategic planning as committee of the whole, and it was pretty much centered around the bond. But the bond is now passed, funding is coming in, things are going to move forward. That's awesome. So the last 2 months of the year we went back to individual committee meetings. And one of the topics was, what are we going to do now? What strategic planning now? And one of the first places we started was with kind of thinking about our board goals. And that moved into our meeting last week, where we started off again talking about board goals. So one of the goals that's not really taken up in any other committee right now is one of the newest ones, which is sustainability. So sustainability is, it's kind of a big idea. It rolls in a lot of different things, but it's an idea concept that's really important to a lot of our students. Sustainability can be anything from saving energy, saving resources, taking care of the land and buildings around us, thinking about clean air, clean water, climate change, all kinds of sustainability can mean all kinds of things to different people. But it's definitely something that's really important to the kids. So the board had added that into the goals, and in the goals there was 3 parts, 3 things that we wanted to accomplish in the 22-23 school year. The first was to develop a committee that would look into sustainability. The second part, that committee will put together a mission statement for the sustainability committee. And then finally, at the end of the school year, there would be a plan put forward for the board to look at and hopefully adopt, that would lay out for maybe, and this hasn't been started yet. So, but something that maybe would be, look at the next 3 to 5 years and say, what kind of things can we do? And what do we want this sustainability committee to really be? What are all the things that we want to do? So we talked a bunch about that at the strategic planning committee meeting. And one of the nice things about this very first meeting on the 3rd day of the new year was that we were able to kind of come to some actionable stuff in strategic planning. So Dr. Malash, are you okay? So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Malash for a moment, and he's going to tell us who the administration has kind of talked with and gotten commitments from to form the beginning of this committee.
Thank you, Dr. Rude. I appreciate you turning it over, and there's a lot of folks that are excited, right, about the reinvigoration of this work. Back in, Mrs. Wilson, 2015, all of our schools in the district received at least bronze level awards from Sustainable New Jersey. We had a couple of schools that received silver level awards at that time. They've changed their guidelines about certification, but there have been folks across the district who have been active in this work. So we have administrators from all three levels, Dr. Matt Covington from High School East, Dr. Al Morales from Rosa Middle School, Mr. Rick Mishiosha from Sharp Elementary School to be involved in the work. I'm working with Mr. Redfern, who's the CHEA president. He has reached out and has heard from a number of staff members, just trying to kind of focus that group a little bit. Right now, the numbers are a little overwhelming for where the group is going to be to start. And then the secondary folks will be working to have a couple of students from the high schools, both East, West, and somebody from the alternative program to be involved in the initial development of the mission. We're waiting until we get the teachers that are involved so we can finalize. And then Mrs. Cohen is working on finding a date. I'm still hopeful that Dr. Rude, that you'll be representing the board to serve as a liaison with the board at that point, if we can work that out. I think your discussion and your involvement with what is fed into the development of the goal and what we've talked about with strategic planning would be an ideal role for you to serve in that liaison piece. Would be great. So looking to set up a meeting for Mrs. Cohen is looking to set up a meeting for before the end of January, and then continue on once the committee meets to set their next meeting dates, and then around Marchish or so to be able to report back out, to the committee and then to the board on that mission for where they see the committee going.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Milosh. So one piece in there that Dr. Milosh mentioned is that there will be a board liaison to this committee. So in strategic planning, I've talked about being happy to take on that role, but that was in a committee with only four of us, and I definitely want to open up to the board. One, to see if anybody has any questions, concerns, strong opinions, whatever, and to get a sense whether the full board would be accepting of my role in that committee. Ms. Gallagher.
I'm excited that the district is looking to do some more sustainability efforts. It's been something that I've been quite passionate about in my personal life over the last couple of years. And if you're looking for another board representative, I would love to, whether it's just kind of like ad hoc sitting on meetings and just hear what you're talking about. But I think this is a good step, to kind of move forward with the district to be more sustainable, and however you define that, right? Whether it's like reducing waste, just being more efficient with resources, and however that the committee decides to define that. So that's great.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any? Do we need to do a straw poll or anything like that, or? Okay, so I don't think a formal announcement or vote or anything is required. So at present, I'll serve as the liaison for that committee, but it's my understanding that a lot of times, well, we can't, like, quorum is more than 4, right? So I think there will likely be opportunity to participate in that committee. And definitely this is the kind of thing, like, I championed in the strategic planning that we start with a small core group of people just to get the mission statement set up and to get kind of the inner workings of the committee set up. Because when you're starting something brand new, a lot of times if there's too many voices in the room, nothing gets done. So, but I envision with this committee that once the core mission statement is done and plan and putting together the plan begins, the committee will likely reach out a little bit broader to bring in, make sure, because we want different voices. We want to make sure we have, administration represented. They'll be start with the core of the committee. We want teachers represented, but we also want students involved in this committee. Like I said, this isn't an issue that is probably most relevant to our students as they're the future. And we give the world to them at some point. So, so that's important. And I'm sure that I'm hoping that at some point, I don't want to make, in my household, we don't make promises. We say we'll do our best. I think that it would be great to have some community involvement as well. And we'll see how the committee decides to go about that. I don't want to speak for for anything because it's not my place. So there's an order of business done. Part one of our board goals accomplished. Good job. So we also talked in strategic planning, again, what is this committee going to be? And our outgoing board president really challenged me before in the 2 meetings before the holidays. He brought up, well, I don't know if it'd be good for the board to do some activism. That's probably not the role of the board. And I'm so glad he said that, because I turned around and I said, oh, that's exactly what we're gonna do. That's it. So we talked about, like, I see the strategic planning committee as being an amazing space where we really don't have a fixed agenda to be able to think a little bit bigger and broader. So what are the issues impacting the district that we can kind of incubate some increased thought? I talked about the committee. We talked about the committee being a space for education. So education for ourselves as board members, and to hear some differing opinions. So some of the first things, and again, I'll have to defer credit to Mr. Ovadia. But 2 pieces are fair funding and HIB legislation. Those are both things that come up again and again as things that our state policies don't necessarily either meet our needs, make sense. Like there's constant conversation on the board, in the community, about there being problems with some of these different things. So fair funding. The per student contribution from the state is pretty low in Cherry Hill compared to a lot of other districts. And we'd like to talk about we have talked a lot about how that's not just. And so we want to think about how can we as a board in our strategic planning committee, and then to the full board, be a little bit more activist in that. If we don't think it's right, then we have an opportunity to make our voice heard to our legislators. And we can also invite our legislators to speak to us and to, ask them questions, and, talk to our community groups that have been studying this stuff more regularly. So that's one of the first things that I think that I think the committee will be looking at in a little bit more depth is fair funding. And we'll be reaching out to some different groups to kind of get some field some speakers to educate us a little bit more on that stuff. And similarly with like the HIB laws, we as a board sit in, this is kind of a window into the soul, but we often sit in, so those who care about transparency, here you go. We sit around and talk about how frustrating, am I allowed to say this, Paul? I can? I'm good. Okay. Yeah, we talk about, sometimes the state statutes don't necessarily do or accomplish what we think that they should, and we have to carry out, according to statute, in a lot of what, that's our responsibility to follow the law. But if certain things in the law don't necessarily make sense, then as a, then the people have the responsibility to speak up. And so that might be an opportunity for us to improve legislation, or make a suggestion that our legislators improve legislation. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe we can't do much, but we can at least be loud. We can at least try to move the needle on different things. So those are a couple of the like the big topics that I think we'll be able to spend some time on and just kind of incubate thought. And I think this is also a great time for me to say to other board members, if you have, things that don't really sit well in other committees and you want to start a conversation, or you want the board to start a conversation, let us know and we'll bring that up in strategic planning. And I'm looking at the ends of the tables to the students. Like, again, this is an excellent opportunity for things that aren't necessarily on the board plate to like bring up and see, can we have a conversation about different things? So I think that I pretty much covered most everything. I hope we'll have some exciting, interesting discussions going forward, but I'm pretty excited that with sustainability, we've got that kind of kicked off. I see that as going off on its own now, and we'll occasionally report out as there's progress, but for now, I think we're off to a good start. I guess I should open up. Are there any other questions or anything else? Joel?
So just a comment, having sat on strategic planning last year when it met as committee of the whole, had the opportunity to see sort of this early transformation into a more aggressive, more involved, more engaged committee. And the discussion that we had last week, which you talked about tonight, and the discussion we had the previous meeting, I thought were exactly what strategic planning should be. And it's exciting to know that we'll have an opportunity to have these conversations to start making some ideas, and maybe eventually move them off to other committees that might take up that work, and then there may be something we'll hold on to. But the excitement was there. I think all of us that were in the room that night contributed and listened intently as well. So they were conversations which I was happy to be part of, participate in, and look forward to this kind of work. I think it can be a very important, exciting, interesting committee for the benefit of not just the other committees and the board, but also the students in the district as a whole. It's off to a really great start.
Thanks, Joel. Anyone else? All right, back to you, Mary. Oh, you wanted to, yeah, go ahead.
Just to echo Mr. Mayor's comments. This is just really exciting, and Dr. Root, I really appreciate the energy and the initiative that you're bringing to this. And Mrs. Gallagher, I'm excited that you're ready to jump in too. I think a lot of good stuff will come. So I just really want to thank you and thank the committee. I'm happy to see what's coming down the pike. So, all right. And we will move on to now our special action agenda. And I'm going to move this piece. The superintendent recommends, and I make a motion to move the following items 17.1 to 17.5. Do I have a second? Mrs. Fleischer, are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars, if you could take the vote, please.
Okay, board members, I have opened up the online voting. You can cast your votes. If there are any no votes or abstentions, please let me know. And we have a unanimous yes vote.
Okay, we'll move on to curriculum and instruction. Mrs. Winters, could you please move the CNI agenda?
Sure, the superintendent recommends, and I move the following: 18.1, approval of attendance at conference and workshops, and 18.2, approval of the nursing services plan for the 22-23 school year. Do I have a second? Ms. Elmore Stratton, are there any questions? Thanks, we can call the vote.
Okay, board members, the online voting is open. If there are any abstention or no votes, please let me know. And we have a unanimous yes vote.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, could you please move the BNF agenda?
Certainly, the superintendent recommends, and I move the following: 19.1, approval of bill lists, and 19.2, resolution approving the submission and acceptance of a grant application. Do I have a second? Dr. Rood, are there any questions? Seeing none, Ms. Sugars, would you please open the voting?
The online voting is open. Board members, you may cast your votes. Okay, we have one no vote, Mrs. Gallagher. The rest are yes votes.
Okay, and we'll move on to Human Resources. Ms. Elmore Stratton, if you could please move the HR agenda.
Sure. The superintendent recommends and I move the following. 20.1 termination of employment certificated, 20.2 termination of employment non-certificated, 20.3 appointment certificated, 20.4 appointments non-certificated, 20.5 assignment salary change non-certificated, 20.6 other compensation certificated. Do I have a second? Mr. Mayor. Any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars, you can please open the vote.
Sure. Okay, the online voting is open. If there are any no or abstention votes, please let me know. Okay, we have one no vote, Mrs. Gallagher. The rest are yes votes.
Okay, Mrs. Fleischer, could you please move the P and L agenda?
Sure. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. 21.1, approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying, investigation decisions template. 21.2, approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying, hearing decision. 21.3, first reading of policy. Do I have a second? Mrs. Winters? Any questions? Mrs. Sugars, can you please open the vote?
I have to abstain from 21.2.
I also need to abstain from 21.2.
Mrs. Sugars, I need to abstain from 21.1 and 21.2. Yes, yes.
Okay, other than the abstentions noted, we have a unanimous yes vote.
Okay, and we don't have anything to vote on for strategic planning, so that we now go to new business. Do we have any new business to discuss this evening? Okay, board members, do we have any old business to discuss this evening? Okay, left, right, left. Okay, and now we will move on to second public comment. So this is the second public comment section during which you may comment on any topic. If you would like to speak, please either approach the podium, which is where we will start, and then we'll alternate between the podium and online. As with the first public comment, we ask that you state your name, your municipality, and we said it before, but I'll just read it again. Cherry Hill is a community that values education, and educational topics often bring out a passionate response. The Cherry Hill Board of Education supports a school climate in which our diversity is a source of strength and all are included. Respect is foundational in how you treat, in how we treat each other and how we support our administration and staff in their essential work. Please join us in practicing the utmost respect for all. And looks like we have a speaker at the podium, so.
Hello.
Get started.
Jen Nadio, 224 North Madison Avenue. Congratulations to the new board. Tonight, I'm speaking as a community member only, who lives on the west side of Cherry Hill and loves it there. Please don't contact me tomorrow and ask what Giuseppe thinks, because I'm not here for Giuseppe. I'm here for much more. I listen very carefully to the board meetings. I have attended lots of meetings in the last 17 years. There are some serious concerns I have about, or after hearing what's been said about scores. What is the definition of transient? Dr. Malash has said this word for years. What is the definition? And if this is truly the reason for score issues, what's been done to change it? When I taught personally years ago, I would make sure students who joined us later in their education career were able to be caught up. Why isn't that happening? This admin and BOE has repeatedly said that students come here for special education. Are they the transient students? Next, why is there no consistency at every school so that there's no concern as to where the children are sent for redistricting? Throughout my years in the district, I've heard exactly what Dr. Malash said last week in a committee meeting about not giving students what they need because they couldn't give it to other students. How can this district say they believe in equity and that statement be made? To be honest, I'm not sure there's a true definition of equity in this district. Lastly, why are we still moving special ed children all over the district to be educated outside of their neighborhoods? I really have seen what this does to one of my own sons. It's horrendous. He's home with me now. When can we change the program so students in special education can attend other classes and experience LRE? There are students who need to be around peers as a peer learning together, not as extra credit or requirement for the National Honor Society. My understanding was that special programs are staying in certain schools. Based on what was said tonight, are you now saying that every middle school will have multiply disabled, autism, learning language disabled, and behavior emotional supports class? If so, I want everyone, including the BOE and every parent, to see what those plans are before the Board of Education votes on that. I want to thank you all for listening and have a very good evening.
Thank you. And we will go to the line, and I believe this is Dr. Podowitz. So if you could state your name and municipality, please.
Hi, my name is Jeff Podowitz, and I live in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Please Google search for SFRA district profile. This is on the Education Law Center's website. In 2021-2022, Kingsway Regional School District received approximately $6,300 per student. Eastern Camden County Regional School, High School District received approximately $4,500 a student. Chesterfield School District received approximately $4,600 a student, and Cherry Hill School District received approximately $2,300 a student. That was 2021, 2022. We received thousands of dollars per pupil, less than the other districts. But note, Cherry Hill High School East alone has a higher percentage of at-risk students that's considered free and reduced lunch students and ELL than all these other districts. The money did not follow the at-risk child into Cherry Hill. An article posted January 14th, 2018 from the Burlington County Times titled, Chesterfield joins group taking legal action to address school funding shortfalls. It starts, this is a quote, "We are tired of being grossly underfunded and our taxpayers are tired of being grossly overtaxed." Close quote, said James Lavender, superintendent at Kingsway Regional School District, one of the districts that are part of this legal action that is known as a petition of appeal against the state education department. Superintendent, Newton Township Superintendent Kennedy Green said a property tax fairness is in this state is an existential issue and needs to be addressed now. Chesterfield Township Committee member Andrea Cass said we need more money in what even way, any way that is. It could be through advocacy or through lawsuits, but it has to happen. I agree and did agree with these leaders. Reed, Explainer, Abbott versus Burke, NJ Spotlight, July 23rd, 2013, 9 years ago. In my comment to that article, I wrote, this lack of an equitable distribution of state tax relief hurts communities. Overtaxation relative to income and property values can destroy communities. Look at what happened to the cities in New Jersey. Leaders, it is about time for you to forcibly stand up for our community. And by the way, bravo for Miss Nadia. I think she said a lot. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we'll come back to the room. And if anyone would like to speak at the podium, if you could please approach. Thank you. No, just to state your name and municipality. Thanks.
Amanda Greenstein, Cherry Hill. I have to echo what Miss Nadio just said about West Side. I sit here tonight with my Kingston peers, with Miss Nadio from the Cherry Valley area. I see no representation of our side of town. I see no representation up here of for my children. I understand you guys have no control over who runs in elections, but some sitting board members here had the opportunity, not one, two, to sit two West Side homegrown mothers that went K through 12 in this district. You squandered that chance. You chose not to. Slides from last year's presentation on middle school redistricting, which I probably should have noted earlier, but didn't think about it. The only representation you had at the middle school level was George Guy and Lynn Vespikian, principal and vice principal of Rosa. Again, no West Side representation. Ms. Wethington already said it's pretty hard to change the demographics of back. There's two sides to this town. Unfortunately, this has gone on for 40 plus years since my mother was in school here. You guys are doing nothing to bridge that gap. That we program and message that you guys came up with, it's false, because you guys are doing anything but to bridge a gap between the East and the West Side. You are tearing it further apart. And I have to respectfully disagree with Dr. Root's sentiment about the smaller class sizes at Carusi if this takes effect, because Miss Sexton sitting behind me just did some research, and Cherry Hill High School East teacher to student ratio is 15-1 with a ranking of 7. Cherry Hill West is 12-1 with a ranking of 3. Economically disadvantaged students are the mitigating factor here. If any of you look past your own noses outside the East Side and now the newly minted Berkeley East Side, the Berkeley privilege I've seen on Facebook, the privilege tax that people think they pay, you would see that the economically disadvantaged is the problem here. And any of you who take action to not remedy this situation, that we will not be overcrowded until 2025, 2026. That gives you 2 years to fix this. You are all part of the problem.
Thank you. And now we'll go to the line. Carolina Bevitt.
Hello, Carolina Bevitt, Cherry Hill. I would like to advocate for more handwriting in our elementary school classrooms. So for writing and language arts instruction, I think elementary school kids should be working primarily with pencil and paper so that they can solidify their command of the alphabet and writing mechanics. Just like we don't hand first graders calculators to add and subtract, elementary kids should not be typing compositions. I think 2 things need to happen that would help to improve student performance across the board, which is something we are all hoping to do. One is create a very clear and comprehensive computer skills curriculum for elementary schoolers starting in kindergarten. I know they currently have a computer skills course, but our district should have a very well scaffolded program that supports students to become responsible, proficient users of technology. The program should help kids gain expertise in typing and formatting to support them when they type their work in the future. Internet safety should also be a topic. Kids need to master these skills before being expected to produce any writing assignments on the computer. And then number 2, clear district-wide expectations should be set for how computers should be used at each grade level to support learning. In grades K, 1, 2, and even 3, kids can use computers for supplemental curricular support such as Zern or Epic Reading. Then in 4th and 5th grade, maybe then kids can begin to type final drafts only and use computers for research. And just to reiterate, here are some reasons computer usage should be limited for young kids. Handwriting helps children practice and remember writing conventions and become better spellers as opposed to a computer feeding them autocorrections, because autocorrect eliminates all thinking and learning. Handwriting provides kids with a way to holistically engage with the writing process. Handwriting helps reinforce letters, which helps improve reading skills. Handwriting strengthens memory. Handwriting helps students write more productively because they're not wasting class time hunting and pecking for letters on a keyboard. Handwriting helps improve fine motor skills, and typing without knowing how to type creates lifelong bad typing habits, potentially impeding fluent writing for a lifetime. And finally, computers can be a huge distraction during class time because kids are always trying to surf the internet or play games when they shouldn't be. Those are just a few reasons. I could go on and on. With Eureka Math, kids are taught multiple methods to solve the same problem. After mastering each way, they can choose the method that works best for them. The same should be true for writing. Handwriting should be a tool that all children have in their toolbox. And I want to reiterate, I'm talking mainly about writing. I'm not talking about reading. I have no problem with like kids using computers, but specifically for writing, kids should be handwriting their assignments. But as someone with an undergraduate and a master's degree in elementary and special education and ESL, I cannot emphasize enough how important handwriting is to learning foundational reading and writing skills, something that all children especially need since the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we go back to the room. If anyone would like to speak at the podium.
Hi, Andrew Rossi, Cherry Hill. Thanks for hanging in there tonight, and thanks for having me. In 2008, we moved here. The lottery was in place. We had a choice between a home in Barclay and we had a choice between a home in Kingston. I chose Kingston because it was diverse, because it offered my children a look into a very diverse community, both economically and racially, and I wanted them to be exposed to that. It wasn't a problem because the lottery would allow them to go to Rosa should they choose, or they could go to Carusi, not a big deal. When the initial discussion started about redistricting, we were very encouraged because the lottery was supposed to provide equity, or getting rid of the lottery was supposed to provide equity in curriculum and equity in the faces in the classroom. So that's great. There wasn't a mention on geographic location being a priority. In one 2021 meeting, a board member stated what her first priority was in redistricting. I really look at the balance of students in terms of economically disadvantaged students and economically advantaged. I think it's really important to have students who are from different experiences, different life experiences, different backgrounds. I think that really enriches our town and our schools. According to the pie charts from December 7th, 2021, with ARK attending Rosa, Beck's projected economically disadvantaged population will be 11%, Rosa's 17%, and Carusi's will be 33%. Carusi's economically disadvantaged population will be 3 times the economically disadvantaged population at Beck. In February 2021, Dr. Malash stated, "The only way society has grown is that communities come together and support one another." Is redistricting our middle school community based on income coming together and supporting one another? I don't believe that that's true. There is so much to be achieved by having students exposed to a diverse community, a community diverse in cultures, backgrounds, and outlooks. I'm begging you to please keep that in mind. It's why we moved to Cherry Hill. It's why I love the school district. It's why my kids love the school district. Please don't take that away from them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm looking to go back to the line, and I don't see any hands raised online. So I'm going to come back to the room. Anyone would like to approach the podium? You could please state your name and municipality. Mr. Short.
Rick Short, Cherry Hill. Ms. Stern, welcome. I'm going to start positive. Welcome as president. Mr. Mayor, welcome as vice president. You just heard Ms. Nadio make a beautiful speech. Just heard 2 others make a beautiful speech. It's sad that you're dismantling everything. You shouldn't fix what isn't broken. So, but what I really want to talk tonight about is the bond, and what numbers are to be held accountable for. You know, there's $500,000 in question right now. I'm going to send all the board an email about this. The $500,000 in question is this. It's the project at the stadium. On November 4th, 2022, Our district said that it is a capital funds project, but you already voted it for the bond. It's already in the bond. And the other problem is with the bond is it's at the wrong location. The stadium isn't behind Cherry Hill West. It's about a half mile away. Piggybacking off of sustainability with Dr. Rude. Look, let me be the elephant in the room right here. The biggest thing you can do, and there are powers to be that don't want this sustainability. The biggest thing you can do is solar panels in parking lots. And I hope, Dr. Rude, I hope you take the bull by the horn and tell the district, just like with the with that you want a light bulb, that hey, we want solar panels because that's going to do more than anything. And I hope if they do put solar panels in, that they take that money that they revenue and reinvest it in the schools as automatic. Wouldn't that be great to taxpayers to say that every cent that we raised from solar panels went into fixing our schools? And you know, there's other things coming up. There's gonna be 10 roofs put in. You could make them cool roofs. That's already going to be decided. I hope, Dr. Root, I hope you take that bull by the horn. Don't let the architect make them all black like they did with Cherry Hill East. And then finally, with 30 seconds left, you know, top things for the bond coming up, safety. I'm always about safety. We need parking bollards like Vincenttown schools, like Mount Laurel schools. God forbid student gets hurt. It's going to be on your ticket because you didn't have parking bollards. What about the vestibule right here in the school? You missed that. And we can talk about porta potties at Cherry Hill West later. It's disgusting. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go to the line, Panina Mintz, and please state your name and municipality.
Dr. Panina Mintz, Cherry Hill. I'm representing No Left Gen in Education. I'm also representing the Cherry Hill Republican Organization. And I'm also representing myself as a parent and taxpayer in Cherry Hill for many years. I'd like to address Ben Rude for strategic plan for the school system. What about academic excellence as a strategic plan goal number 1 to make Cherry Hill the best school system in the entire New Jersey education system? I do not hear any kind of strategic plan to restore the prestige of Cherry Hill school system academically in New Jersey and beyond. That should be a priority number 1 before sustainability or anything else. I also would like to know why equity is trumping academics. Why is the board so concerned about equity and the religion of equity and not concerned about the loss of academic achievements for the past 2 to 3 years of our students? I also would like to know what happens to all the millions of dollars of COVID funds that the school have received? What happened? What did we do with those funds? Can you please report to the public what have you done with them? More so now for data and demographics of the school district. Read the homeless policy of Cherry Hill School District. Would you be able to share with the public how many homeless students do we have in our district? Would you be able to share with the public how many children from other towns are studying in our district? I'd like to know that. This is important because as taxpayers, we are footing the bill for every student in Cherry Hill. I'd like to know, why is the school district training kids to just notice skin color and not character? Can you please answer that question? Why are you training kids to look at the color of skin of these children and not their character? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll go back to the room if anyone would like to speak at the podium.
Don't start the thing yet. I gotta compose myself. Ann Einhorn, I'm representing the people at 1017 Edgemore Road tonight with our inquiring minds. I just have some housekeeping I would like to bring up. When it came to the numbers for Carusi and Beck, those numbers added up to 205 students. I would like to know where, out of the 700 students, where did the other 495 go? Are they elementary? Are they high schools? Because if there's this massive of an influx, I'm not so sure some of it wasn't from our students that were outside the school district during COVID times. On the website, I am a very frustrated consumer in that I can find nothing on the Cherry Hill Public website. There are no demographics, there are no schematic drawings from the bond that we just passed. There's only a reference to the fact that we sold the notes. Where am I supposed to look for the information? I don't have all day to be on Google, which I don't find to be a reliable source. Can we expand what you put on this website? The community needs to know. When you take every schematic drawing and every proposal from our district architects off that website as we move forward into the projects, it's not a level of transparency that which is not one of my favorite words either. I can't find anything. Committee meetings. So I've been allowed to attend committee meetings, which is great. But for the last 6 months, what I've noticed, some of your agendas are so long that even your committee doesn't finish. I'm not asking for the public to speak. I'm grateful to be there and to hear what you have to say. An hour is not enough. I know that you're committed for time, etc. So is I. We used to have 2 meetings in a week as committee members, 2 separate meetings, something you might want to consider or expand how much time you have for these committee meetings. On a really good note, Dr. Morton, don't look worried. I don't cry often, but when I saw Jim Marks stand here tonight, I know it's a direct result of what you did to encourage a school that badly needed a marching band for the kids that didn't have any other areas to involve themselves in. Those uniforms are a disgrace to the public school system. And I know that you were a catalyst working with him to get the monies to finally get these kids to have a chance to have a marching band. They did not have one for a very long time. And look at those faces tonight. So I thank you because I know that you're the principal at that time. And you couldn't have done anything better for Mr. Mark and his program. And yes, I am prejudiced because he was a mentor for my son. But
Thank you, Ms. Einhorn.
thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to the line and we have Dave Kay. If you could please state your full name and your municipality.
Good evening, Dave Kuzmanich, Cherry Hill. I'd like to thank everybody for coming back after the new year and welcome the new board and say Happy New Year. That's probably as polite as I will be for the rest of this year. So enjoy it now. One of the things that I keep hearing about, again, like Mr. Short said, is we're talking about equity and not about education. You know, my son is lacking in reading, writing, and arithmetic, and I work with him every night at home, and he's just not getting enough in the classroom, but yet he's hearing about pronouns and everything else that he shouldn't be learning about in middle school. Also, I wanted to speak real quickly on the redistricting. A young lady earlier this evening said pretty much that you guys pulled the wool over her eyes. And if she had known at the vote, the time of the bond vote, what you guys had planned and known since the beginning of the school year, she would have voted differently. Kind of sounds like that's probably which way the rest of the township would have gone. And you guys got your bond. Congratulations. Congratulations on losing a lot of respect to a lot of the homeowners here in this town. The other thing is now that with the redistricting, with Carusi getting night school, I understand that everyone, the kids that started at particular middle schools last year are available to finish their middle school career there. Question is, can kids that live closer to a middle school that they aren't able to get to this year, allowed to transfer for next year. So being which I live a mile from Rosa, my son goes all the way over to Beck. I would love for him to be able to go a mile away from home. So that way he can get a little bit longer sleep, since we're also talking about starting school later, and get a better education because he will have more sleep, according to the CDC and according to what you guys think about more sleep and later start dates. Me personally, I would just, be a better parent and send my child to bed earlier so he can get that 8 to 10 hours of sleep to get a better education. Thank you. And like I said, this will probably be the nicest comments I'll have for this school season. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the room. If there is anyone who'd like to approach the podium, please feel free. I think you also know the drill, so.
Yoni Yaris, Cherry Hill. Yesterday was National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. I just wanted to thank the district under the leadership of Mr. Saporito for the effort of the school safety team. Although they're not technically law enforcement in the letter of the law, they do so much for our community and have worked really hard to bridge the gap and make a lot of improvements that we are, I feel like, a leader for the state in terms of balancing school safety and simultaneously ensuring equitable responses across the board. We also appreciate the efforts of liaisoning with Cherry Hill Police Department so that our students aren't first reaction is to run and not have an appreciation, but then they run with the police department, especially at Cherry Hill High School West, and talking to the officers recently is one of the best parts they get to do. And it's credit to the board and the administration for that going on. Congrats to Ms. Stern and Mr. Mayor on being elected to leadership. I look forward to the next year with both of you. I know most of you, some of us not always had the best relationship. I look forward to building a better rapport on that going forward. And I am really excited for what you guys are bringing to the table. Excited for the conversation about achievement to be taking place in CNI. As someone who holds a doctorate in education, I know personally how challenging these conversations can be. I hope a safe place will be created for the admin and the board to work together. I would like to suggest utilizing the SMART goal framework as part of these conversations so that we're not just making big grandiose goals. We all want to improve the achievement gap, but let's talk about how we can make a targeted approach to that. For populations, or just figure out a way to make it so it's granular and easy, not necessarily easy, but accessible. If we're going to say we're going to improve the achievement gap, we're going to be only looking at the high number, and we're not going to be looking at different populations and what it means for them. That was the mistake I made during my journey, and I was fortunate to have a mentor smack me upside the head during this time, to say you need to look at each of the subgroups, looking at that time at the African-American males and Latino males, especially, who were performing significantly below their peers. Had I just looked at the top number, I would have been ignoring the important data set. And then number 4, if you were listening to the response to the State of the Union, my red flags went up. The response given seemed to put S2 in danger. And as a district who was receiving ample funding through S2, we should be on the lookout for that. And I look to fair funding to hopefully lead that effort, and for the board, especially after what Dr. Rood shared today about the strategic planning being more engaged and that process, and hopefully all of you will, or someone will be at the board at the next fair funding meeting, and looking forward to what we can do legislatively on that. And thank you all for your time. It's not easy. I will say this again every time I come up here. I sincerely appreciate all the efforts that you guys do in volunteering in this very thankless role. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm looking, I don't see anybody on the line. So I'm going to go back to the room. Floor is yours.
Alana Yaris, still Cherry Hill. Dr. Rood, I'm looking and speaking specifically to you because you are the chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, and you spoke about fair funding as part of your committee. And as a leading member of the Fair Funding Committee, I would welcome you to come and attend our meetings as a liaison ad hoc to help us in our fight, especially if S2 is up for discussion with the state. Our next meeting is on Zoom. We meet on Zoom, so it's accessible for all. Thursday, January 19th. And I know you can't respond because you're not the board president, but since you mentioned it, I just wanted to let you know. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, still no other hands online, so coming back to the room. Okay. So now we will go to superintendent's comments.
Thank you, Ms. Stern. There are a few things that I can follow up from the public comments. I just go through notes. First, and Dr. Yaris brought up that yesterday was Law Enforcement Awareness or Recognition Celebration Day. I actually met with Chief Kemp yesterday from the police department, and they had an opportunity to be on the news on PHL 17 with Jennifer Lewis Hall, who is an alum from the district, and to celebrate them. And we certainly would like to recognize and celebrate our 9 campus police officers. January is, since we're talking about recognitions, January is also School Board Recognition Month, which we always find administratively is kind of an awkward month for it because it's the reseating or the seating of the new board. You'll see a banner in the front of the administration building when you come in, that recognizes that. We'll be putting out more information. Mrs. Wilson will in the weekly newsletters. But yes, on behalf of the staff and the students, thank you to the board members during January, which is Board Recognition Month. There was a question about, can middle school students transfer to a nearer middle school? Yes. So students current 6th graders and 7th graders who will be rising 7th graders and 8th graders have the option to stay in the middle school where they started, or to return to their newly districted middle school. So as an example, if a child, attended Rosa, and now they have a districted middle school that changed, they don't have to attend Rosa, they can attend the new middle school. If a child attended Beck and now their elementary school is districted for Rosa and their family would like them to attend Rosa, yes, they can attend Rosa. We'll go through a process. Mrs. Wethington alluded to that. It's something that the Middle School Implementation Committee has talked about for parents to be able to identify what that looks like. But yes, they will have that option. I know there's a question earlier in the evening about the appointment of the construction council. The monies for the construction council come out of the referendum monies. That's part of the money that was budgeted as part of the referendum. That's how that contracted service will be paid. There's been a lot of discussion, and I know there are a lot of comments about the change in policy in 8110 regarding attendance areas. Mrs. Wethington's presentation will be posted tomorrow sometime afternoon. We will put that up there. I appreciate all of the discussion. There's a lot that has gone into the work that the committee did and the work that the committee continues to do in the discussions with the board. So I am grateful for everyone's comments that they made. Transient or transiency means being in a place for a short amount of time. It's what transiency is, to go through. We know, and some of it is just a natural reality of where there is more high density housing, there's more transiency. There are families that live in some of the high density housing for shorter amounts of time than do in single family homes, is what that references to. I do not believe, because this came up as well, I do not believe that what Mrs. Wethington said tonight or was alluded to from the committee is that all special classes will appear at all 3 middle schools. I do not believe that is what was indicated. What was indicated is that there will be opportunity for the expansion of the number of special classes and what it looks like between east side of town and west side of town. There was a comment earlier, a question earlier about there not being district boundaries for high schools. There are district boundaries for high schools. It's in policy 8110. Where it goes through, it's actually it's at the very top. It's the 4th paragraph down, and talks about what the boundary line is along the Turnpike, Haddonfield Berlin Road to Brace Road, then to the Cooper River. Children or families who reside east and south of the line that are districted for high school east. Children and families who live west and north of the line are districted for high school west. That's in that policy and has been in that policy. That has not changed and has existed for quite some time. I think that's it, Ms. Stern, really to address directly.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we're at the end. I will take a motion to adjourn the meeting. A lot, only two hands on the motion. Mrs. Fleischer. All in favor? We raise your hand. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming out.